I think it's a very difficult situation though when some families refuse to acknowledge that right. Put many sisters in a very difficult situation where they feel like they'll put the pressure on and say, no, you must marry your cousin, for example, or something of this nature.
Yeah, marriage within families, close relatives, I mean, that's become a standard in many parts of the Muslim world.
Although Islamically this is not encouraged.
Not at all. I mean, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in his own example, he only married one relative, was Zainab. The rest were not his relatives. So this practice, though it has become a norm in many parts of the Muslim world, is really not specifically encouraged by Islam. It's permissible, but not something which should be the norm and the standard. And then people are refused and rejected simply because they're not close relatives. There's an article which I had read, published in Juma magazine, in which a female medical doctor, she had written about the so-called problems of cousin-type marriages, that claim that this will produce, defective children with defects. And she shot it down. She brought the scientific evidence to show that this is not really true. And people have exaggerated it, really.
So we understand that it is permissible, but it is not encouraged by the practice of the Prophet ﷺ. So it's open, and I think we need the parents to benefit from this more than their children, because they are the ones sometimes who have the advice to their kids. So do not block the doors for your children. If she is a lady and she's a girl, she wants to marry a person who is not from the family, you should encourage this based of the Prophet ﷺ. I think this is a very golden advice, and I hope that Muslim parents would benefit from this advice everywhere.
Inshallah. Otherwise, I guess it forces some of the temptations of society around them to see. For example, like people having like girlfriends or boyfriends, love marriages.
Eloping and things like this.
Yeah, exactly.
But the issue, when you mentioned love marriage, I mean, because this is something which is a very sensitive issue, again, in the community, where the whole concept of a person being attracted to another one and being in love or infatuated or whatever, and marrying on the basis of that this is considered to be not acceptable, rejected. That, of course, the bottom line is that having an attraction is important, in the very fact that the Prophet, may God's peace and blessings be upon him, had instructed the young men who were going to get married to go and look at their bride-to-be, to make sure that they are in fact attracted to them.
Yeah.
So this Islam encourages that there should be something there. Marrying without having any kind of attraction is putting people in a situation which may work okay, may not work, and the pressure of society may keep them together, but their marriage itself will be missing a certain ingredient that, they would be living together in a situation where they're really not that comfortable. But they may do it for the sake of the kids or whatever, but in the end, they have suffered, where
Islam does not encourage
it. Doesn't encourage it. It encourages and stresses the idea of why did Allah prescribe marriage? Because that there would be, mawadda, or this love and comfort, in the marriage.
In fact, the two components of marriage that are known as mawadda, love, and something in addition to that, which is mercy between them.
Also, some of the things that tend to force people into this situation is when they have like an overly lengthy engagement period.
Yeah, the lengthy engagement period is not really encouraged either, What has happened, actually, that Muslims have adopted some of the customs of non-Muslims to have actually what you call an engagement, or even wearing engagement rings and things like this, which are really not from Islamic tradition at all.
The proposal?
Yeah, it's a proposal. If it's accepted, then you get married. I mean, you may have to wait for some time for this reason or that, but what has happened is that the people have worked out this other system where you actually are married. You get married on paper, but you're not, the celebration isn't actually done, and, you're like boyfriend and girlfriend. But legitimately, this is what they've worked out. In that circumstance, again, though we can say this is not impermissible, the fact of the matter is that once you've signed that paper, you're husband and wife.
Yes. That's right.
So, they were free to do whatever they want to do. Your parents can't say, well, listen, you all don't actually go and live together, you can just go out together, and then you're creating, an artificial circumstance which the religion doesn't support, really.
Born and raised in the UK, middle of the West, you would definitely have some problems, not necessarily be your problems in marriage, but problems of the Muslims there in UK. What do you think if you put them in priorities? What is the most problematic issue in getting married? Is it the rejection of the parents? Is it the age factor? Is it the financial factor? Is it looking for how to find the most proper Muslim woman? What do you think is the most important?
I think it starts with, first of all, people are not following their religion. They seem to be following aspects of their culture in preference to religion.
Again, back to cultures.
Yep.
People mix culture and religion,
Yep.
and they follow the culture.
And they follow the culture more than the religion.
For
Yeah.
example,
Okay.
For example, like when I heard of the revert brother who was told his marriage will be haram to the sister from Asian background, on the basis that there's too much of a cultural gap, he was told it will never work. Yes, it did. Aspects like that. The next thing, I probably maybe put some of the blame in the UK, at least, on some of the sisters. Not all of them. Mashallah, there's loads of, alhamdulillah, practicing sisters. But some of them seem to have adopted a very much a feminist kind of attitude. Now, this basically puts off so many of the brothers. I mean, I've been to marriage events before with brothers, really, honestly, searching for somebody that just fits reasonably within their criteria. I mean, everyone's got different criteria. I mean, some say, too fat, too thin, 2 eyes, 2 ears. It depends how demanding you are. But these guys, they were just looking for the basics. They couldn't even find it. They're facing girls who are not prepared to wear hijab. They want to focus on their careers rather than their husbands. Lead very much a un-Islamic lifestyle in places such as like going out on their own to alcohol environments even, to this extent.
What do you advise? What's your advice to the Muslim girls who are raised in the West and they are affected by the feminist movement?
Well, I mean, this goes back to general understanding of Islam. I mean, a young woman who has already fallen into that trap, that's a whole nother problem. What would be the advice to parents who are raising children in the West to protect them from the harms of some of this thought? I mean, this is the development of alternative educational institutions, right? Because where the girls and the boys are raised in the regular government schools, etc., then these ideas are constantly being, propagated, and issues of, for example, accepting, say, homosexual or lesbian relations as being, personal choices, and there's no problem with it, and people should understand that this is, how God made the people, and this kind of an attitude.
Absolutely is not true.
But this is being promoted, and your child growing up hearing this stuff, don't be surprised if at the end of it all, they're, falling into these kind of
Traps
or corruptions. So, I mean, I would say that the advice goes towards parents more so, that, you are held responsible. God is going to ask you, why you didn't provide your children with the proper Islamic, influenced education.
Yes, exactly.
Because that's your primary responsibility.
Following on from that one, part of the same question is really saying, one of the things that puts the brothers off is to say, when a sister will at the start say, I'm never going to accept polygamy, for example. Now, some of the brothers say, well, I was never thinking of it. But when the lady says it's not an option for you, they kind of get cold feet. This is another aspect that's become very common in the UK, this mindset of non-accepting of it, even though it's part of religion and it's not a theoretical part.
Well, I think that the challenge, I mean, it's not surprising that people would feel that way, the whole idea of polygamy is, totally rejected in the West. It's a crime. Bigamy, you can go to jail for it, So it's not surprising that young people growing up in that kind of environment would have these kinds of attitudes towards it.
But isn't it the right of the woman in Islam to put a condition on her husband in the contract, the marital contract, that she does not accept him to marry another wife? Is it the right of women to do that,
Well,
as we know from
some scholars, some of the schools of Islamic jurisprudence do recognize that right. The right for her, for example, to have the right to be divorced if her husband takes another wife. That's one thing. But the idea to say that the husband cannot take another wife, you see, again, that would be making impermissible what Allah had made permissible. So this is why there's a distinction between the two. The condition that can be added, that she has the option, that if I want to step out, if you take another wife, I have the right to divorce, then that's something which is more acceptable from a legal perspective.
Okay.
It's probably better discussed before marriage rather than after. So at least everything's,
at least
the intentions are clear.
But of course, these things change. A man may come into the marriage and say, well, I'm fine with it. I had no plans. As you said, I have no desire. One wife is enough for me. And then after years of marriage, for one reason or another, maybe his wife doesn't have any children. She can't have children. And he feels, well, I want to have kids.
Uqdat al-nikah is known in that it's in the hand of the husband. However, does the woman have the right to be divorced, to ask for her divorce, or Islam deprives her from this right?
Well, we have what is known as khula, which is a female instituted, or initiated divorce, where she seeks divorce through the court system. That is different from the male initiated, where he does so by a pronouncement straight away, right? He can pronounce the divorce, and that starts the process rolling. Whereas for the woman, she can do it through the court system.
She has the right, but she has to do it through a specific way. Is there any wisdom or rationale behind this?
Well, the explanation which is usually given is that the emotional nature of the woman being such that if she gets upset, these things can easily come out and she'll be pronouncing divorce left and right. Whereas a man tends to be more calculating, he's not as emotional. So he will think about the consequences of it. Not to say that people don't, men are not also emotional and they may do it, incorrectly. That exists, but we're just talking about a relative state. The woman tends to be much more sensitive, to react to things more quickly. Also, she has, prior to her period, she becomes cranky and these kind of things and may, respond to things that she shouldn't really be responding to. So to avoid putting it in her hand where it may be used too often or used, could say almost irrationally, they put it in the hands of the man, for actual pronouncement. Whereas they have not deprived her of the right, because they say, yes, you can, but it's done through the court system to make sure that you have to think it up. Because before you go to a judge and you seek and you ask, you have to have thought it out. It's not an easy, straightforward process like just a pronouncement. Though a number of scholars do give the woman the right at the time of marriage to put that in her contract, that she will have the right to pronounce divorce as the man. And if he agrees to it, then she has the right. Because actually it happened in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, not that it was put in the contract before, but that a man came to him and said, my wife asked me for the right to divorce, and I gave it to her, and she divorced me. He said, but you gave her the right.
You gave her the right.
So he confirmed that it is permissible that a woman could pronounce divorce under those circumstances where she's been given that right.
You have to keep your word.
Taking word. There's an issue here. A lot of parents who are affected by their culture back home, they don't want to let their kids, whether they are male or female, to marry at early age. Some of them prefer the age to be 36. Some of them delay it until 39. They said that you have to be well established in life, having a house and a car, and doing all this before they support them to marry. And I think this is becoming a real problem, a real threat for those people who can live until 39 years old. I don't know how can they control themselves in a healthy Islamic way. What advice would you give the parents?
Well, I would advise that, one has to reconsider this and look at the consequences in the society to this delayal, this artificial delayal, which is that young people who are at the height of their, desires and emotions, in their late teens, early 20s and that, if you're denying them marriage at that time, then you are forcing them really through other channels, to find outlets, other outlets, and those outlets end up being corruption in the society. And that's what we're faced with in a number of the various societies where, you may find young women developing lesbian-type relationships or young men homosexual relationships or extramarital affairs and these kind of things happening. That is the consequence of delayal, without a doubt.
I guess on that financial aspect as well, there's the aspect of where somebody says, okay, he wants to take a second wife, and someone says, well, the criteria is 2 mansions and 2 of everything. Is it really 2 houses, or is it 2 private spaces? Or, people back before time, they could have had 2 tents. What is the criteria?
Well, 2 tents are 2 homes, right?
Exactly.
Or 2 apartments.
Exactly.
The point is it's 2 homes. But to say, for example, that you want to marry a second wife, you've married a wife, you've got a home, right? And you want to marry a second wife and move her in with your first wife and say, okay, you have a bedroom, that's your space. No, it's not acceptable unless they accept it. If both are in agreement, we're fine with it, etc. That's another situation. But does the second wife have the right to have her own living area, her own unit?
The first?
Not necessarily exactly the same as the first, but to have her own, yes, she does. That is her right. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's wives all had separate apartments. They refer to them hujurat. So the hujra could become very simple. It may only be 2 rooms.
Exactly. You could have a house become 3 flats if you so wanted to divide it up. I'm saying,
but
I don't make it impossible.
As long as you make distinct areas, because one single house, if you don't have 3 kitchens, you want to put 3.
Exactly.
You run into problems, because these are the areas where the problems arise, where the women, have to use common
shared facilities.
Yeah. So if you're able to split a house into 2, the upper part has its own unit, it has kitchen, it has all the necessary things, and the lower part, then that's possible.
Time is running, and I'd like to go back to the same question that I said, that the parents do not encourage their kids to marry at early age. Some of the parents would have the logic and rationale of saying that when we allow our kids to marry at young age, there is a concern that they might get a very quick divorce. How do you see this advice is compatible with pure Islamic perspective?
Well, the issue of quick divorce is not really an issue in the sense that...
Is the age and factor young to be...
It's not going to change it, because people can get, if they get married at 39, they can still get a quick divorce. The potential is still there. Maybe they're more mature, so they may think things out. It's true in that sense, but if we weigh that minor possible benefit against the major harm which comes from the delayal, we have to say that harm far outweighs the so-called benefit that you have identified. And we have to say that you are in fact going against the recommendation of the Prophet ﷺ, who said, "Oh, young people, get married."
Okay, so there is an encouragement in Islam to
marry young.
Marry young.
Yes.
To enjoy what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. And this is a way of continuing the human race. Yeah.
And I can say personally, my son, who was 17, at the time, I got him married. He wanted to get married. I didn't want him to have girlfriend relationships. So he got married. His wife was 18. She's from India.
He was 17 and she was 18.
And
how is their life?
They're fine. He is now, he's reached 30 and they have kids and they're fine, So I'm not saying...
He made you a grandfather at a young age.
Yes, I'm a grandfather already, yes.
Yeah. But you still encourage this and you say that this is not the main factor for people to get divorced.
Yeah.
Once they get a job and they can afford a house, they can be responsible.
And even, actually, it's not necessarily
Yes.
that, because initially, when they got married, they stayed with us, with my family, you know? So we helped them in the early stage until they got themselves on their feet.
So if the family, the father and the mother can help their child to get married and to live with them for some time until they become responsible, you do encourage that. Okay. This is very glad, and this is good tidings and good news for parents to encourage their kids to marry. And also, I hope that the kids would benefit from this and do that. Any final comment before we...
There's one more misconception or really question, really, that seems to always crop up in the UK whenever, back onto the polygamy issue yet again, because this is one that seems to be so unclarified. So many people have the idea that you can only take another wife if there's a problem with the first wife. Can you any comments on that?
Well,
please?
in general, plural marriage is just a part and parcel of marriage in Islam. If the same reasons why a man may marry his first wife, he marries a second wife. It's not a requirement that he's unable to have children. First wife is, is infirm, is sick, or whatever. These are not issues. I mean, there may be issues for people to think about doing it, but it's not a requirement, nor is it the requirement that the first wife's permission be gotten. And there's a lot of misconceptions around that. But of course, the issue comes back to issues of responsibility. That the man who considers taking a second wife should, be sure or feel certain that he's able to look after the two families. And he's not going to abandon one family to take on a second one, which unfortunately happens in some cases.
Any other issue you'd like to raise before we...
Another one last one really from me is that we've almost come full circle back to the start. We said that a Muslim man can marry a Christian lady, but a Muslim lady can't marry like a non-Muslim. Now, I think there's a sense of responsibility on the brothers to give like a level of priority for the Muslim sisters, because they don't have that option.
We come to the end of this episode. We thank both of you, and I hope that the viewers benefited from the input from Dr. Professor Bilal Phillips and from the participation of Brother Omar. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward you and to benefit you of what you've heard. Hopefully, inshallah, we'll meet again in another discussion group. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is your host, Mamdouh Muhammad.
Banks may or may not fortify your wealth. Investments may or may not multiply your wealth. But giving zakat certainly fortifies, multiplies, as well as purifies your wealth.
Support Peace TV. Send your donation in zakat to IRFI, Islamic Bank of Britain, 394 Coventry Road, Small Heath, Birmingham, UK. Postcode B100UF. Sort code 300083. Swift BIC code IBO BGB22. IBAN GB52LOYD 3096 3401 024192. Pound account number 011323001. Euro account 011323002. US dollar account 011323003. Please confirm your contribution at support@peacetv.org.
Support Peace TV, the solution for humanity. Give your zakat to Peace TV.